Hey, I am glad you're here, and we're going to take a little bit of time right now and dial in on the real meaning of Christmas. And here's what I've found, and I think a lot of people have found, in all the things that we've packaged Christmas in, the gifts, the time with family, the busyness, and the decorating, and everything, the meals, the feasting, it's all great stuff. But if we don't slow down and dial in on the real meaning of Christmas, it's missing something. It's kind of empty. And so our hope is every year we'll be able to gather here at the Capitol Theater, do Christmas at the Capitol, and become a tradition for the whole community that we get together and take a little bit of time and dial in and just help our community center on why we celebrate Christmas. And we're just really glad that you're here this year to help celebrate that and start that tradition. Now, every year pastors have to put together a Christmas message, right? And it's the challenge is that it's the same story, right? In the Bible, there are 4 accounts of Jesus' life: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Those are the 4 Gospels, but there's only 2 of those Gospels have an account of his birth, and that would be Matthew and Luke. And so we've got just a few chapters that lay out this story. So we're always coming back to the same story, right? It's the same story every year at Christmas time. And the challenge for pastors is to come up with a way to make it fresh again. So I'm going to try and do that, and I might hit it and I might not, but we're going to land on the message of Christmas. But we're coming back to the same scriptures, the same accounts. And we're going to look at Luke's account to start. Now, Luke was a doctor. Luke was in a real sense, a historian, because when he wrote his gospel, his account of Jesus' life, he put very specific things in there that placed it in history and in time. And he was very detail-oriented and very accurate. And he was friends with Peter and the apostles, and he knew Mary, and he interviewed the folks that were there, and he put together an orderly account of the birth of Jesus. And he starts his account in Luke chapter 2 with ironclad proof of a man who claimed to be God, a man who claimed to be the Son of God. And we'll start there in Luke chapter 2, verse 1, and this is what it says. In those days, Caesar Augustus issued a decree that a census should be taken of the entire Roman world. This was the first census that took place while Quirinius was governor of Syria, and everyone went to their own town to register. So, Luke gives us some very specific historical figures to kind of place this on the historical timeline. We've got Caesar Augustus, who was the emperor of Rome at the time that Jesus was born. And we also have a guy named Quirinius, who was the governor of Syria. And so this is not like long ago in a galaxy far, far away. This isn't, once upon a time. Very specific places. This is a historical event. And Luke just gives so many details that if it were a fairy tale, he would not have had or would have given. And he starts with this guy named Augustus Caesar, or Caesar Augustus, who happened to claim to be a god. And he claimed to be the Son of God. But he didn't start out that way. He started out as a guy named Octavius. And when he was 4 years old, his father died. His mother left and ran off with some other guy, and he was raised by his grandmother. And his grandmother happened to be the sister of Julius Caesar. Maybe you've heard of Julius Caesar. He was the leader of the Roman Republic. And Julius Caesar saw in Octavius potential. He saw grit. He said, this kid's got it. And he watched Octavius grow. And Octavius watched Julius Caesar lead the Roman Republic. And he was like, I just want to be like my great uncle Julius. And so when he was old enough to join the military in his teens, he joined the military. And it was time to go out on this great adventure and military conquest. And Octavius got sick. And he couldn't go, and he had to stay behind. And so Julius Caesar sails off across the sea, and Octavius stays behind, but he recovers. And so he gets a couple guys together, and he jumps in a boat, and he crosses the sea, lands behind enemy lines. This is the first SEAL mission ever. And he lands behind enemy lines, makes his way through enemy territory to Julius Caesar's tent on the front lines, and walks in, and Julius Caesar is like, wow, this kid's got grit. And so when he turns 19 years old, Julius Caesar names him the sole heir to the throne and the sole heir to his fortune. And it was that year that Julius Caesar was betrayed by his friends and by the Roman Senate and was assassinated and killed. And so the Roman Republic fell into a bit of chaos. There was a guy named Marcus Antony. Maybe you've heard of Marcus Antony, and another guy named Marcus Lepidus, and then there was Octavius. The three of them were kind of the power brokers, and they came together and they avenged the death of Julius Caesar. But after that, man, it went crazy. It just split into factions, and it was a very, very dark time for Rome. Well, Marcus Antony falls in love with a woman from across the sea. Her name was Cleopatra, and they get together and they decide. So I told you this is in history. It lands at a very specific point in history. They get together and they make a plan to take over everything. But what they didn't count on was that Octavius would beat them in battle, and he does. And then they take, as the history falls in line, they take their own lives. Octavius takes it all. He takes control of everything, declares himself emperor of the Roman Empire. It is no longer a republic. It is no longer representative. He is the sole one in charge. And he doesn't like the name Caesar Octavius. It just doesn't have a ring to it. So he changes his name to Caesar Augustus. Now, Augustus comes from the Latin word, which means holy or revered. It was a word that was used in referring to the gods. It was a word that was used for like he who controls the affairs of men, and he liked the ring of that, and so he called himself Caesar Augustus and literally declared himself a god and a son of the gods. Does that sound familiar? It wasn't uncommon in the Roman Empire in those days to greet somebody that you would meet and say, Caesar is Lord. And that is what Jesus was born into. See, Jesus, when we look at our mangers under the tree, well, we see a little barn. It was probably a cave, might have been a barn. But anyway, we see our little barn, and we've got the nativity figures in there, and it's just like all in kind of its own little cocoon. But it didn't take place in a cocoon. It took place in a context, and context is everything. We have a crazy Roman emperor who thinks he's a god, and God looks at that and goes, you know what? There's some irony here. I think I'll show up. We'll see what happens. Well, the nativity takes place there. Now, when my son was born, we got a nativity set, and we wanted one that he couldn't destroy. So we got the Fisher-Price Little People's nativity set. Are you familiar with this one? It's our favorite nativity set. Do we have it? There it is. There they are. Yep. Now the shepherds are missing, but we have the shepherds in ours. Got to get the shepherds if you're going to do it. So I got the wise men there. And that takes place in a world that was very different from our world, but in a world that was very real, that existed all those years ago. And so Caesar takes control of the world, and he has all the power. Augustus Caesar has nobody can question anything. He can inconvenience anybody he wants, and he decides we're going to have a census. Nobody can question him. And no, not only are we going to have a census, but I'm going to make everybody go back to their hometown where their family's from to register. And so that's what he does. And so we find Joseph and Mary. Mary, 9 months pregnant, and Joseph's from Bethlehem, so they have to go back to this little town called Bethlehem. It says, so Joseph also went up from the town of Nazareth in Galilee to Judea, to Bethlehem, the town of David, because he belonged to the house and line of David. He went there to register with Mary, who was pledged to be married to him, and was expecting a child. While they were there, the time came for the baby to be born, and she gave birth to her firstborn son. She wrapped him in cloths and placed him in a manger, because there was no guest room available for them. So we have a man who claims to be God and the Son of God who has all the power. Then we've got this obscure couple. They're peasants. They're poor. They're not religious leaders. They're not religiously, they probably have a faith, but they're not leaders or anything. They just live in this little town called Nazareth, which nobody has ever heard of. And if they have heard of it, they don't think very much of it. It's in the middle of nowhere. And they live there just kind of eking out an existence. And God juxtaposes the two of them in this story. So brilliantly, so brilliantly. God says, I can use this. I can use this. Well, Mary's visited by an angel. And the angel says, Mary, you're going to have a baby. And she's like, how? I'm a virgin. That's impossible. And he said, well, God's placed the baby inside of you. She said, okay, I guess if God's, an angel God, I'll go with it. Not like she had any choice. So Joseph was pledged to be married to her. And he finds out. And he's like, I had nothing to do with this. I'm out of here. He was going to walk away. He was going to leave her. Didn't want to embarrass her, but he was going to leave her. And an angel shows up in a dream and says, Joseph, God is in this. Don't be afraid to take Mary. It's a God thing. And Joseph at that point said, oh, okay. And he went along with God on this one, even though it was about to cost him dearly. They have to pack up and walk back to Bethlehem. It's 80 miles away. They didn't have a car. This is a 3 or 4 day journey with a 9-month pregnant woman. They travel back to Bethlehem. And it had been prophesied 400 years before that the Messiah would be born in Bethlehem. Now, they probably didn't have this in their consciousness, because when King Herod found out that the king of the Jews was born from the Magi, we know that he got the religious leaders together and they had to have a powwow to figure out where the Messiah was going to be born, and they said Bethlehem. And so, and they refer to this passage in Micah chapter 5. It says, but you, Bethlehem Ephrathah, though you are small among the clans of Judah, out of you will come for me one who will be ruler over Israel, whose origins are from old, from ancient times. And so, they just happen, because of this crazy emperor, they just happen to be in Bethlehem when the child is born. Now, I find Joseph interesting. I think Joseph is the unsung hero of the whole story. Joseph's just always just kind of standing there, right? There's Joseph. We don't know much about Joseph. He had 4 dreams. 4 dreams with angels in them, but that's about all we know. He doesn't say anything. We don't really talk about Joseph so much. Mary gets all the attention. But Joseph is a hero. When you think about it, Joseph, this angel shows up and says, in a dream, and says, Joseph, take Mary to be your wife. Well, and then Caesar calls the census. You know what that census was? That census was a forced family reunion. We got to all go back. The whole family's going to get together in Bethlehem. Anybody ever been to a family reunion? Anybody ever pick up a girlfriend at a family reunion? Welcome to West Virginia. Just kidding. But when you go back to your family reunion, you want to be able to brag about all the good that you've done. Look what I'm doing professionally. Look how things are going in my family. And Joseph goes back to this family reunion with a pregnant girlfriend. And all of a sudden, it's not a fun situation at all. At all. Joseph, there's no explaining. No, you don't understand. She's a virgin. Yeah, right. No, you don't understand. There was an angel, and then, it said that this is a God thing. Right. See, everybody knew what was going on. They could look at Mary. She's 9 months pregnant. They knew what was going on, but nobody knew what was going on, right? They couldn't know the story behind the story. All Joseph and Mary got when they pulled into Bethlehem was disapproving looks and judgmental stares. Anybody ever feel that way at a family reunion? Christmas dinner? Talk about being misunderstood. And Joseph didn't ask for any of this. He didn't ask for it. He was minding his own business, being good. And his plan was just to walk away, to divorce Mary. It says in Matthew 1:19, in Matthew's account, it says he had in mind to divorce her quietly. Now, I need to explain this, because the way they went about the marriage process was different than we do. And so divorce was the appropriate word there. But they had 3 phases to a Jewish wedding. The first phase was the engagement, and that's where the parents arranged the marriage, and that was the engagement. Then the second phase was called the betrothal, and that lasted between 9 and 12 months. There was no physical intimacy. They didn't live together, and that was the kind of the preparation for the wedding ceremony, which was the third phase. They were in the second phase, the betrothal phase, right? And so they were into this thing, and so it would have been considered kind of a divorce. And so this angel shows up in this stage. Joseph's like, I had nothing to do with this. I've been good. I've behaved myself. And the angel's like, I know. And Mary's been good too. God is in this. Keep going. And so here he is. He said yes to God, knowing it would bring shame to him. And here they are in Bethlehem. And it should be a celebration. It should be a celebration with friends and family. Look, here's my new wife and our children, and we got a baby on the way, and I'm doing the family proud, and instead it's avoidance and shame and disapproval. Can you feel his pain? Can you feel the emotions stirring as Joseph is standing in the nativity? And there's not even room in one of their family's homes. Like nobody has space for them. They're by themselves. She's 9 months pregnant, about to give birth, and there's not a room for them anywhere in the whole family. They are on their own. She gives birth. Usually, a woman in their culture would have a midwife and some other women around to help. Joseph probably delivered this baby on his own, and they were out in the barn with the animals. Oh, this was not a fun first Christmas for Joseph. He's just kind of standing there in the nativity, the odd man out. If you look at the picture again, you'll notice the wise men, they look happy to be there. Right? Mary, it says in the scripture, treasured these things up in her heart. The angel's pretty happy. If the shepherds were there, they went out and told everybody, and Joseph's standing there going, gee whiz, I'm so misunderstood. Look, you can see the expression on his face. It's right there. He's the odd man out. Emotions swirling. He's been rejected by his family, judged by the people who are supposed to love him the most. Maybe you can relate. And it says, when the wise men left, in verse 13 of Matthew's account, when they had gone, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream. Another dream. Get up, he said, take the child and his mother and escape to Egypt. Stay there until I tell you, for Herod is going to search for the child to kill him. So he got up, took the child and his mother during the night, and left for Egypt, where they stayed until the death of Herod. And so was fulfilled what the Lord had said through the prophet, out of Egypt I called my son. Jesus fulfills so many prophecies, guys, just in his birth, stuff that he had no control over, certainly through his life and in his death. Hundreds of prophecies that were written hundreds of years before he showed up, he fulfilled. Nobody, statistically speaking, could do that unless they were the one who was to come, and Jesus was. But Joseph has this dream. Another angel shows up, and he tells him, look, I want you to go to Egypt. And Joseph's got to be looking up like, are you kidding me? Like the Egyptians and the Israelites, we have a bad history. They don't like us very much. Remember the plagues? Remember, like their whole army died in the Red Sea? It was bad. They don't like us. I don't think it's a good idea. But Joseph chooses to obey. And he goes to Egypt. And he's got to be thinking, Lord, where's the blessing? Like, when does this get easier? I'm obeying. It's supposed to get easy, right? When I obey, it's supposed to get easy. And it's not getting easy. So let's recap. An angel shows up, talks to Mary, says there's a baby inside of you miraculously. And she says, okay. And Joseph has the angel show up and say, hey, this is a God thing. He says, okay. They go to Bethlehem. They have the baby. The wise men come, the shepherds come, and then Joseph has this dream. You're supposed to go to Egypt, the angel says in the dream. So they go to Egypt. Now, while they're in Egypt, they didn't have Facebook, but they're there, and it's not very far away. It wouldn't have been very long that the word would have come that Herod, the crazy governor of the area, or king, I guess, King Herod, he was king. king, governor, whatever, had all the baby boys 2 years old and younger in Bethlehem, in his hometown, killed because of the son that he was taking care of. And those weren't just any kids, those were his nephews. That was Bethlehem. That was his family. And so he had to carry that on top of it all. Then he has another dream that says, go back. So he comes back. And then he has another dream that says, and the angel says, go to Nazareth. And so he does. And they settle there, and he raises Jesus in Nazareth. And the whole time, Joseph's got to be thinking, God, where's the blessing? And I'm not saying it wasn't without blessing. I'm sure there was a lot of blessing along the way. But it was hard. And we like to think, if I do what God tells me to, then it's going to get easier and easier and easier. And sometimes it does, but sometimes it's hard. But God was up to something bigger, and Joseph got to be a part of that something bigger. Pretty amazing. Joseph chose God's plan over his own. And he chose it without the luxury of knowing what was going to happen next. He didn't know Jesus was going to grow up and walk on water, that he was going to grow up and heal the sick and restore the sight of the blind and feed 5,000 people with a box lunch. He didn't know any of that. He just knew that God said, I'm in it, and keep walking. And so he did. And so he did. And he runs from one difficult situation to another difficult situation. But he's trusting God, and he's choosing God's plan over his own plan. And he ends up raising a son who wasn't even his own son. At one point, they lost Jesus. Now, here's a little pastoral advice for you. Don't lose Jesus. It's a bad thing to do. I freak out when I lose my kids for 3 minutes, right? They lost Jesus for 3 days. What happens when you lose the Son of God for 3 days? That's a lot of pressure. And they find him, and this is what Jesus said. Why were you searching for me? Because you were lost. Why were you searching for me, he asked. Didn't you know I had to be in my Father's house? And Joseph's reminded again, oh yeah, he's not my son. I'm raising him, but he's not my son. See, all Joseph knows at this point is this isn't the life he had dreamed of. Joseph is no different than us. We've all, when we were younger, we thought, well, my life will be like this, and then this will happen, and then that will happen, and very rarely does it turn out like we thought it would. And it doesn't for Joseph either. His plans are wrecked. God hijacked his life for a bigger purpose. And he's just following God one step at a time. Joseph's a fairly remarkable dude. Again, I think he's the hero of Christmas. Other than Jesus. He's the hero of Christmas because I think maybe, just maybe, and this may challenge your theology a little bit, but maybe God picked Mary to carry Jesus because of Joseph. He could have put his son in any young virgin in Israel, but where are you going to find a guy who's willing to go through all this and stay faithful and keep walking and keep doing the right thing and keep saying, I'm going to do what you want instead of what I want? God, what kind of guy is going to follow him through all this, through the embarrassment and the misunderstanding, through the trip to Egypt and back, being the odd man out in the nativity? Where's he going to find a guy who's willing to say, it isn't my plan for my life, but because you're in it, God, I'm in? All I want is a divorce, but because you say not to, I'm in. It's a guy of character, incredible character. And Mary was going to need him to get through all that she had to get through to raise Jesus. Now, I know what you're thinking because I thought it too. You're thinking, you know what, if I had an angel show up and tell me what to do, well, I'd do it. Even if it wasn't my plan, I'd do it. No, you wouldn't. You wouldn't. You got to remember, these angels came in a dream. See, you'd wake up from the dream and you go, oh man, those wings I had last night, you wouldn't believe the crazy dream I had. And you talk yourself out of it. But Joseph didn't talk himself out of it. He kept walking. And here's the deal. God speaks clearer today than he did then. Did you know that? Joseph and Mary would give anything to have what we have. See, the story hadn't been written yet. They didn't have the hindsight. They didn't have the New Testament of the Bible to look at. and see how the story would turn out, what the end would be. And they didn't have that to guide their lives. And God guides our lives more through His Word than almost anything else. And every week we get together here at the Capitol Theater on Sunday morning at 11 o'clock, and we open God's Word and we say, God, will you guide our lives? And He does. And He does. And there's such clarity in that. And yes, there are times where we have to take steps of faith, but He guides our lives in a way of clarity that Joseph and Mary would have loved to have had. But there is one principle from Joseph that applies today as much as it did then, and that's this: that tomorrow's guidance starts with today's obedience. Tomorrow's guidance starts with today's obedience. If you want God to guide your life, obey what He's telling you to do today. That's what happened with Joseph. At each step, he chose God's plan over his own plan, and the next day God would say, okay, here's where you need to go. Here's another dream. Here's another nudge. And God guided his life because he was faithful and he obeyed. Today, he got the guidance tomorrow for where to go next. Every step of the way, God directed Joseph. Why? Because he gave up his hopes and dreams and said, God, I'm in on yours. Different way to live, isn't it? Powerful, though. There's so much we can learn from Joseph. And it's amazing. He didn't say anything in the entire Bible. He didn't say anything. He had 4 dreams. And we can see what he did and yet learn so much from this man. One of the things that Joseph shows us is the invitation to follow God is for all people. It's for everyone. Joseph was the most unlikely character. He was a peasant from the middle of nowhere. Had nothing going for him as far as the credentials of this world. And yet, God chose him. You know, when the angels showed up and spoke to the shepherds on that night when Jesus was born, they said this, do not be afraid, I bring you good news that will cause great joy for who? All the people. God's invitation to follow him isn't just for Joseph, isn't just for Mary, it's for you. And you, and you, and you, and every single one of us. Jesus said God loved the world so much that he gave his only son. He loved who? The world. All of us. Not just the Caesars, not just the religious people, not just the folks who have their acts together, not just the relatives who come back to the family reunion and can brag, right? Even those of us who can't. God, his invitation is for everyone. God came after us. One of the names given to Jesus in the account of his birth is Emmanuel, which means God with us. God came after us, and God came after us because he knew we couldn't get to him. So he came to us, and he died to pay the penalty for all of our wrongdoing so that we could be in a relationship with God, so that he could guide our lives and make us great. And that's his plan for us. And so many people think, well, no, I'm disqualified. You don't understand, I've done all these bad things. And all I'm saying is, Joseph probably would have been disqualified too. But he's not, and neither are you. It's for all people. Second thing we can learn from Joseph, that Joseph shows us, is the invitation to follow God is a daily choice. It's a daily choice. It's something that we have to choose to do each day. Joseph had to choose at each step along the way to follow God, to continue to follow God. Nowhere in the Bible do we find Jesus saying, pray a prayer and then you're good to go. It doesn't matter what you do, just pray a prayer and everything will be good from there. No, Jesus says over and over and over again, follow me. And that following him often begins with a prayer. Nothing wrong with praying a prayer. He says, follow me. And it's a daily choice to follow him. Joseph had a daily choice. Joseph chose to get over himself, to die to himself. And here's what I'm saying. This is so, so very important because a lot of us are looking for life. And the life you're looking for is found in getting over you. It's found in getting over you. It's found in choosing God's plan over your plan. Is found in following him. and you will find the life that you're looking for. The third thing that we learn from Joseph. Joseph shows us the invitation to follow God as a calling, not necessarily a comfort. Who likes comfort? All right, we got 3 of us. The rest of you, sleep on the floor tonight. It'll be great. We love comfort. I love comfortable chairs, comfortable beds. I love a comfortable home. I love comfort food. Let's hear it for comfort food. Woohoo! All right, we almost worship comfort, right? We're looking at Joseph going, where's God in that? He's not looking very comfortable. God's in the middle of that. God calls you to be great. God has, people say today, boy, I just want to have an impact. I want to make a difference in the world. And there's something wired into every one of us, and that's exactly why Jesus came. He wants to use you to make a difference in the world, just like it's a calling. And sometimes it'll be uncomfortable, and that's okay. And that's okay. You're called to the greatest story, the greatest purpose, the greatest adventure, and the highest significance in the world. Every single one of us. The question is, will you embrace it? Or will you walk away and follow your own story? See, you're invited to play a role in His story. History. His story. The moment you're willing to let go of yours. Are you willing? Joseph found himself center stage in the greatest event in the history of the world. We date time after this event, the birth of Jesus. And Joseph was right there next to the manger in the middle of this scene. He lived a better life. He lived a life that mattered. He lived a life that literally changed the world. And every one of you know Joseph, or most of us do. And isn't it ironic that he didn't want to be there? I mean, isn't it ironic that he's standing there with his hands in his pockets going, man, my family hates me right now. This is really awkward. And isn't it ironic that 2,000 years later, the guy who claimed to be God, who claimed to be the son of the gods, the guy who had all the power, that you, unless you were a history major, wouldn't even know his name if he weren't written into Joseph's story? It's amazing. Who changed the world? It wasn't Caesar Augustus. Joseph is a central figure. Jesus, obviously, a central figure. The people who gave up their plans to follow God's changed the world. Caesar Augustus chose to follow Caesar Augustus' plan. Joseph chose to follow God's. And the outcome couldn't be more drastic or different. Guys, this is the same choice that every one of us gets to make. Is it our plan? Or is it His? Are we going to follow Him, or are we going to follow ourselves? Now, if I know anything about you, you want your life to matter. On your best days, you want that more than you want comfort. And I want to invite you to choose to follow God. Because that's why Jesus came 2,000 years ago. So you can. I'm going to ask us all to close our eyes, bow our heads. And I'm going to lead you in a prayer. And if you have never asked Jesus to lead your life, if you've never chosen to follow Him, it starts with a prayer. It's lived out day by day. It's a daily choice. But it starts usually with a prayer. And you can just repeat after me in the quiet of your heart. And also, I want to say this. If you prayed this prayer before, but you have not been following Him, you just kind of prayed the prayer and are kind of leaning on that, recommit your life to Him today. Let's pray together. Jesus, I want to follow You. I choose to follow You. I want Your plan over mine. I want a life that matters. It makes a difference. And I know the best life will be found in what You want, not what I want. So I ask that You'll come into my life, that You'll forgive all my wrongdoings, and that we could get on this adventure together. Amen.